Hello, this lecture introduces fermentation, the historical source for various alcohols, and for us, our precious ethanol, used by life forms to digest all matter of foods for eternity and used before we eat certain foods so we can digest them or to unlock otherwise undigestible nutrients. New research is even suggesting that harnessing fermentation may be a primary reason Homo sapiens even exist. But for our purposes, this video simply introduces the process in which yeasts consume sugar and produce ethanol as a waste product. So at its most basic level, we have the simple fermentation equation of sugar plus yeast giving alcohol. Again, without fermentation, there is nothing to distill. Distillation does not create alcohol, it only concentrates it. And here, when we say alcohol, we are talking about alcohol in a liquid solution. The amount of alcohol in this liquid is measured as alcohol by volume, or ABV. Our highly fermentable sugars tend to give us the higher ranges, and our grain-based ferments tend to be lower, but they're not always lower. Yeast tend to get us in that 3 to 15% alcohol range. Now in the US, we use proof as an alcoholic measure, which is simply twice the ABV. So a 40% ABV spirit would be 80 proof. Additionally, on the output side, we have heat and CO2, which are not directly relevant to ethanol creation, but do matter during the fermentation process, as we'll mention in a minute. Now we can see that our simple equation is already expanding, and there is much more going on than at first glance. On the input side, sugar and yeast are used broadly to cover much more than it may appear. Let's remember some of our raw materials. Fruit juice, like grape juice, can bring not only different flavors, but also a wide range of acidity levels. Cane juice is almost always lower in acid than grape juice. Acid levels matter because the main species of yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, likes to operate in an acidic liquid environment. But different strains of Saccharomyces like differing acid levels and will produce different flavor compounds depending on both the acid levels and if that heat is retained in solution or dissipated. So we have different flavors being developed by the same raw material and yeast depending on the temperature of the ferment. The acid levels in fruit juices also can help preserve the liquid against spoilage. And the type and quality of the fruit being used, those characteristics will often make it into our alcoholic liquid, and indeed all the way through distillation and into the finished bottle. Remember our fructans from the raw material discussion? Well, the high fructose levels in these cooked and pressed agave juices are not what Saccharomyces cerevisiae most like to eat. So other yeast strains and even species are needed to fully complete their fermentation. This means more and different chemical compounds are created. The yeast used in most commercial spirit production is carefully selected for consistency of flavor and alcohol levels. But there are an unlimited number of strains just of Saccharomyces spontaneously arising or being developed in labs for specialty designer purposes. In some areas, say in Jamaican rum production, the ambient yeast, or those that just live in the vicinity of the fermentation tanks, are considered vital to the flavor profile of some of these styles. When using our grains and starches for the base, we have a very different flavored sugary liquid heading into fermentation. Also with different yeast strains used for flavor development and specific to the grains in the mix, or what's called the wash. Also on the input side, we have bacteria that are ambient or are even purposefully introduced that contribute flavor compounds that may be desirable. Accidental introduction can result in undesirable flavor compounds. A malolactic conversion, for instance, can change the mouthfeel of the liquid and increase lactic acids in that alcoholic liquid. And then there can be any number of other ingredients that made it into the mix prior to fermentation. Stabilizers, additional sugars, flavorings, you name it. All of these inputs create our fractions and congeners on the output side. Fractions and congeners are what we call the additional outputs. Fractions are the hundreds, if not thousands, of different chemicals that come about through fermentation or otherwise survive into these fermented liquids. Congeners are those fractions which possess an aromatic or otherwise detectable flavor to them. As we go into distillation, we will group these fractions by their volatility levels or by where they appear in the distillation process. Now, we are after ethanol here in our alcohol box, but there are fusel alcohols, ethanol, methanol, that also get created here, as well as a very important group of congeners called esters, which bring floral and fruity character to spirits. We'll go deeper into esters as we look at the individual spirits. So, points to remember about fermentation. Remember that basic equation, of course, but also remember that all over the equation there are variables and outputs depending on the type of sugary liquid, the strains and species of yeast, all influencing which chemical compounds are created or survive into the alcoholic liquid. Compounds we call fractions. And within those fractions are detectable flavors we call congeners. And an important set of congeners are esters. Now, for now, just know that esters are a product of alcohols and acids that can produce flavors or congeners. Creating esters or minimizing esters is hugely important, and we go deep in higher level lectures on this topic. We'll also talk a bit more about esters and esterification in some of our category lectures, where they play very important roles in determining an expected style. But knowing even this small amount about fermentation is an important foundation to have before we dive deeper into the specific spirit categories. We'll see you there.